What if I told you that at 40 degrees below zero, the greatest threat to a pioneer on the American frontier wasn't the cold wind, but a sound, a faint, sharp click? That sound meant that an invisible enemy had breached the defenses. In a world without modern heaters where fire was the only source of warmth, survival became an exact science, and a log cabin turned into a besieged fortress. In such brutal frost, materials behaved differently, and the human body functioned at the edge of its abilities. Pioneers didn't just live in the cold, they fought it every minute, relying on knowledge that now seems almost unbelievable. They turned snow, mud, and even their daily routines into tools of survival. These methods were not heroic feats, but monotonous, exhausting work in which any mistake could be the last. The battle was fought for every degree of warmth, every gap in the wall, and every dry splinter. Comfort was measured not by heat, but by the absence of immediate danger. Watch this video until the end, and you'll learn why the greatest enemy of the pioneer wasn't the blizzard, but his own home, and how simple things like dirt, moss, and rags became the only barrier between life and the icy silence. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of pioneer survival. They didn't fight the frost itself, but its consequences. The most dangerous opponent wasn't the blizzard outside, but the physics of heat loss within. Pioneers instinctively understood that warmth was energy constantly seeking a way to escape a heated space. Their log homes, which seem so sturdy to us, were actually full of vulnerabilities. Heat escaped through the walls, roof, floor, and most importantly, through countless tiny gaps. Every poorly fitted beam and every crack in the clay plaster was an open door for the cold to enter. The battle against the cold began with understanding the three main pathways of its invasion. The first was conduction, when the chill simply passed through solid materials of the walls. The second was convection, drafts that sucked the warm air out of the cabin and replaced it with freezing air. The third pathway was thermal radiation. The fire and heated objects radiated warmth that was absorbed by the cold walls. Pioneers had to fight all three phenomena at once. They waged war on three fronts against an invisible, all-pervading enemy. In extreme cold, sound became the main indicator of danger. The cabin's timber contracted from frost, producing loud clicks and groans. These sounds meant that materials were changing shape and that new microscopic cracks could be forming in the walls. Each such sound was a call to action, a reminder that the defenses were weakening. Settlers listened to their homes as attentively as a sentry listens to silence on guard duty. It was an acoustic battle for survival. What do you think was harder under such conditions? To maintain physical warmth or to preserve moral endurance and sanity? Please share your thoughts below. Every opinion matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next explorations. Are you ready to learn the truth? That the famous fireplace, the very symbol of comfort, was actually one of the most inefficient heating methods? Most open hearths we see in movies were more of a luxury than a practical solution. They created dreadful drafts, pulling the warm air out of the room through the chimney. Pioneers on the frontier quickly realized this. So the real hearth in their cabins was more like a clay or stone stove. It was designed to retain as much heat as possible within the masonry instead of letting it escape immediately up the flue. This was the first and most crucial engineering solution for survival. A major breakthrough came with the appearance of cast iron stoves, such as the Franklin or Potbelly. These devices were a true technological revolution. Compact, relatively safe, and, most importantly, incredibly efficient. A cast iron stove heated not only the air, but also itself, becoming a massive heat radiator. It continued to warm the room long after the wood had burned away. Such a stove was the heart of the cabin, and the family's entire life revolved around it. However, any stove required fuel, and in enormous quantities. During extreme frosts, a single cabin could burn up to 40 cubic meters of wood over the winter. Gathering that much firewood was backbreaking work that continued year-round. The quality of the wood was crucial. Pioneers preferred hardwoods such as oak, hickory, or maple. These burned slowly, produced intense heat, and left glowing coals that could smolder through the night. Softwoods like pine burned too quickly and produced heavy soot that clogged chimneys. Yet pine had one advantage. Its resinous splinters were indispensable for kindling fires. Every settler kept a strategic supply of different types of wood. What heating method without electricity or gas do you think remains the most effective today? But even the best hearth was useless if the cabin itself was full of holes. Are you ready to learn about the incredible yet ingenious insulation technique they used to literally seal themselves inside? What I'm about to show you may sound like madness, but it worked. And it was the key secret of survival. Even the warmest stove was useless if the cabin was built incorrectly. Pioneers knew that the real battle for warmth wasn't fought at the fire, but at the walls. The main problem of log houses was the gaps between the logs. Over time, the wood dried, warped, and shrank, leaving spaces in between. These gaps had to be constantly sealed, a process called chinking, or simply filling the cracks. For this, pioneers used a special mixture they made themselves. The recipes varied by region, but the base was always the same: clay or mud mixed with a binding material. Moss, grass, straw, or even horsehair were used as binders. This mixture was elastic and adhered well to wood. Men and women literally rolled ropes of the compound with their hands and tightly pressed them into the gaps between the logs. It was dirty, cold, and endless work that had to be repeated every year before winter. The mixture had to have the perfect consistency. Too thin, it would drip out. Too thick, it would crack when dry. Pioneers were true master technicians, finding the ideal proportions of clay and fiber. But sealing the gaps was only the first stage. The second, equally important one was a process known as banking, creating an earthen mound around the foundation. This was an outdoor insulation method. Settlers understood that cold didn't come only through the walls, but also from below, through the floor. Floors were often just packed earth or laid over a shallow foundation. To block that flow of cold air, they piled up soil all around the base of the cabin. Likewise, snowdrifts that the blizzard built up around the house weren't cleared away. They were welcomed. They performed the same function as the earthen bank, adding an extra insulating layer. The house became like a bear's den, shielded from wind and frost. Give this video a like if you didn't know about these simple yet ingenious techniques.
Now deep and thick against the walls.
What if I told you that everything you believe about life in log cabins is wrong? Pioneers never tried to heat the entire cabin to a comfortable temperature. That was impossible and wasteful in terms of fuel. Their strategy was to create small, localized zones of warmth. The whole family's life at 40 degrees revolved around just a few square feet near the blazing stove. This was their inner fortress, their microclimate. The far corners of the room, especially along the outer walls, could be covered with frost. The temperature within the same room could differ by dozens of degrees. Pioneers accepted this reality and organized their lives accordingly. To enhance this effect, they used simple yet brilliant tricks. The most common was fabric. Heavy blankets, old sacks, or even tanned hides were hung on walls to block cold radiation. This was especially important behind the bed. Fabric created a barrier between the sleeper and the icy wood, greatly increasing comfort. It was the simplest equivalent of modern insulation. If the cabin consisted of a single large room, it was often divided with these same fabric curtains. The family enclosed the living area around the stove, creating a room within a room. This saved precious heat from being wasted on corners or storage space. Sometimes blankets were used to build a kind of tent or canopy over the family's dining table. The warm air from food and breath collected under it, creating a temporary but precious feeling of coziness. Beds themselves became fortresses. They were often moved away from outer walls and placed as close to the stove as possible. If that wasn't an option, the bed was shielded by a wooden partition or screen. The most effective design was the box bed, a bed built into a wooden frame with doors or curtains. By day, it served as a bench, and by night, it became an almost sealed capsule that retained the sleeper's warmth. This nesting doll principle, a house within it, a room of blankets, and inside that a box bed, was the key to survival. Pioneers didn't fight the cold head-on. They built layered defenses against it. How hard do you think it would be for a modern person to adapt to such a way of life? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they endured the most dangerous time of day, the night. Surviving the day was hard, but surviving the night was a true ordeal. At night, the temperature dropped to its lowest point, and the fire in the stove demanded constant attention. Sleep in a freezing cabin wasn't rest. It was a strategic operation. No one went to bed in a cold bed. That wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The bed had to be preheated before sleep, using makeshift warmers. The simplest and oldest method involved hot stones. Large flat stones were kept near the hearth all day, then wrapped in thick cloth and placed in the bed at night. They slowly released their heat, warming the bedding. A more advanced device was the bed warmer. A metal, usually copper, pan with a long handle and a lid. Hot coals from the stove were placed inside, and the tool was used to iron the sheets. Ceramic or metal vessels filled with boiling water were also common. They were tightly sealed and placed at the feet. The key was to ensure they were watertight. A wet bed in that cold would be catastrophic. The bed itself was a layered construction. At the base lay a mattress stuffed with straw or corn husks. This thick layer acted as insulation from the cold floor or bed frame. On top, the family piled every blanket and hide they owned. The weight of this cover could be enormous, but it was essential for retaining heat. People didn't sleep under blankets. They slept inside them, cocooned on all sides. Morning brought another trial. Any clothing left away from the stove froze solid overnight. It had to be thawed by the fire before anyone could put it on.
The settlers must endure this extra step before starting their...
Can you guess what happened when a pioneer wore the wrong clothes? The right clothing was the second line of defense after the cabin walls. The guiding principle the settlers followed is still relevant today: layering. They didn't wear one bulky, warm garment. Instead, they dressed in several thinner layers. This created pockets of air between fabrics, which served as the best natural insulation. The foundation of the wardrobe was long underwear, the so-called union suit, covering the body from neck to ankles. It was made of wool or thick cotton, with wool being the preferred choice. The secret of wool was that it stayed warm even when damp. Its fibers had a complex structure that trapped air, which was vital when a person might sweat during labor. Cotton, on the other hand, was deadly. Wet cotton instantly lost all insulating properties and pulled heat from the body. The phrase "cotton kills" was known among trappers and mountain hunters long before modern hikers repeated it. Over the underwear came sturdy work clothes, wool pants and a shirt, followed by a vest to warm the torso, and finally a heavy jacket or coat. Each layer could be added or removed to regulate body temperature. Special attention was paid to the extremities. Several pairs of thick wool socks were worn on the feet. Boots had to be loose enough not to restrict blood flow. Tight boots were a direct path to frostbite. Hands were protected with mittens rather than gloves. In mittens, the fingers shared warmth with each other. For fine work, pioneers used fingerless gloves or mittens with fold-back tops. A hat was essential, covering the ears. As mentioned before, an uncovered head lost tremendous heat. Often a scarf was wrapped over the hat, covering the neck and lower face. The greatest enemy during work in the cold was sweat. To sweat meant to become wet from the inside. That's why pioneers worked at a steady pace, avoiding overheating and unbuttoned their outer layers the moment they felt too warm. What do you think? Among the materials available to pioneers, which one was the most valuable for winter clothing? In the next chapter, we'll talk about the fuel not for the stove, but for the human body itself.
Winter's far from over.
The human body is just like the stove that stood in the corner of the cabin. For that stove to burn and produce heat, it needed fuel, and high-quality fuel at that. The pioneers' winter diet wasn't about taste, it was about calories. In extreme cold, the human metabolism accelerated dramatically, demanding much more energy. Life and labor at 40 degrees Celsius could require up to 6,000 calories a day, 2 to 3 times more than a modern office worker needs. The main source of this energy was fat, not protein, not carbohydrates, but pure animal fat. It provided the highest number of calories per gram. That's why the frontier diet was astonishingly rich in fat. The staple food on the table was salted pork or salt pork. Pork was ideal for frontier life, easy to preserve in barrels of salt and rich in fat. Slices of it were fried, boiled, or added to stews. Pure pork fat, or lard, wasn't just an ingredient. It was a food in its own right. It was spread on bread like butter, or even eaten by the spoonful for a quick burst of energy. It was fuel in its purest form. Alongside pork, wild game played an important role. The meat of bison, deer, and other large animals was also rich in fat, especially when hunted in autumn. Hunting wasn't a sport, it was a vital necessity for replenishing supplies. Carbohydrates came from cornmeal, oats, and wheat. A hot porridge or stew seasoned with a generous spoonful of lard was a typical breakfast. It provided energy that was released slowly throughout the long working day. Hot drinks weren't a luxury, but a necessity. They helped warm the body from within and replace lost fluids. Coffee was the main choice, strong, sweet, and consumed several times a day. The cooking process itself also helped heat the cabin, as the stove ran constantly with something boiling or baking on it. Food also had to be protected from freezing. Potatoes or vegetables left in a cold corner could freeze and become inedible. That's why provisions were kept in a cellar, under the floor, or in the warmest part of the cabin. In a world locked in ice, the greatest irony was the constant shortage of drinking water. Every nearby stream or river froze deep below the surface. Getting water became a heavy daily chore. If there was an unfrozen spring or a fast-moving river nearby, pioneers had to chop a hole in the ice every morning. This had to be done constantly, as the opening refroze with a thick crust overnight. Carrying the water home was another challenge. Water scooped into buckets began freezing on the way to the cabin. It had to be carried quickly and immediately brought near the stove's warmth. If no water source was close, snow became the only source of moisture. But melting snow was incredibly energy intensive. It required huge amounts of fuel, which was already scarce. Snow by its structure is mostly air. To get 1 bucket of water, you needed to melt 10 buckets of snow. That meant someone had to constantly carry snow inside and watch the pot on the stove. Under no circumstances could snow be eaten to quench thirst. Pioneers and trappers knew this rule by heart. The body spends precious energy melting and warming the snow inside, which leads to even deeper hypothermia. Water brought indoors also required attention. A bucket left near the wall could freeze solid overnight. That's why water was stored in barrels as close to the stove as possible. Sometimes a large chunk of ice was dropped into the barrel. It may sound strange, but ice in water maintained its melting point, around 30 degrees Celsius, preventing the rest from freezing solid. Hygiene took a back seat in such conditions. Water was too precious to waste on washing. People made do with minimal cleaning, using melted snow or ice water for basic needs. Thus, pioneers lived in a state of constant thirst amid a snowy desert. Every sip of warm tea or bowl of hot stew was the result of long, exhausting labor to extract and heat water. The most insidious enemy inside a frozen cabin wasn't the cold, it was despair. Monotonous, dark days, constant discomfort, and the feeling of isolation could break even the strongest spirit. Survival was not only physical, but also psychological. The main weapon against prairie fever, or cabin fever, was strict routine. Pioneers instinctively understood that idleness and chaos led to depression. Every day had to be filled with purpose and work. The day began long before dawn with the main task, checking and lighting the stove. This ritual set the tone for everything that followed. While the fire caught, the family woke up in the cold, dark room. Then came endless small chores. Women prepared food, which was a long process in itself. They mended clothes, sorted supplies, rendered fat for candles or soap. Men were responsible for outdoor work. They had to check on livestock if there was any, bring in firewood and water, and clear snow from the paths. Any outdoor job had to be short and intense, with breaks to warm up. Many tasks were moved indoors. Men repaired harnesses, sharpened tools, or carved new utensils from wood. It was vital to keep hands busy at all times. Sounds were an important part of this routine. The chop of an axe, the creak of a yoke, the hiss of something simmering on the stove. These were the sounds of life, but the most terrifying sound was the wind and blizzard that could rage for hours or even days. That howling tore at the nerves, giving the sense that the house might collapse any moment. On such days, it was especially important to remain calm and keep working, ignoring the storm outside. Long evenings were spent by the dim light of a tallow candle or a kerosene lamp. This was the time for mending clothes, talking, or reading aloud if the house had a book. Routine turned chaos into order. Maintaining a daily rhythm was a form of control, a way to impose structure on an uncontrollable world. When the storm raged outside, the human mind built its own small, predictable universe within the cabin. That was the pioneer's psychological armor. Sometimes, despite all their efforts, the frost began to win. It happened slowly but inevitably, and pioneers knew how to read the warning signs. They could tell when their defenses were starting to fail. The first signs appeared on the walls. When the stove could no longer keep up, frost began to form inside the cabin. First in the corners, then across the flat surfaces. It was most visible on the heads of metal nails, if any were used in construction. Metal was a perfect conductor of cold, and each nail cap developed a white hat of frost, a sure sign the wall was frozen through. Then the windows, if there were any, turned from frosty patterns to thick layers of ice. The ice grew from the inside, as moisture from breath and cooking froze instantly on the glass, soon making it completely opaque. Inside the cabin, the air became sharp and dry. Breath turned to visible vapor even near the stove. This meant the overall temperature had dropped close to freezing. Water in buckets froze faster than it could be used. Ink in inkwells turned solid. Even food kept near the stove became as hard as stone. The most terrifying sign was when the fire in the stove stopped giving real warmth. All the heat it produced was immediately absorbed by the icy walls. The stove burned at full capacity but could only warm the air a few feet around it. In such moments, the family huddled together by the stove, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Work stopped, and all energy went into keeping the fire alive and keeping each other alive. This was the final stage of defense. When the firewood ran low, anything that could burn was sacrificed. First tools with wooden handles, then furniture. It was an act of desperation, signaling that the battle was nearly lost. Most often, however, the pioneers simply waited. They sat in their frozen fortress, conserving strength, fuel, and food. They waited for dawn, for the frost to ease, for the chance to step outside and patch up their broken defenses. It was in these moments that not only the cabin's endurance was tested, but the human spirit itself. The ability to stay calm, to resist panic, and to keep fighting. That's what separated the survivor from the victim. So, what was the true secret of survival on the American frontier? It wasn't strength, nor luck, nor even bravery. It was knowledge, a deep, instinctive understanding of how the world worked when stripped to its raw elements. The pioneers weren't engineers or scientists, yet they intuitively grasped the laws of thermodynamics. They built microclimates, used air as insulation, and turned dirt, moss, and rags into effective survival tools. Every detail of their lives, from how they dressed to how they banked earth around their cabins, was the result of countless winters of trial and error. It was a science written not in books, but in scars, blisters, and memories. To us, their lives may seem unbearably harsh, but within that harshness lay an extraordinary harmony with nature. They didn't fight the world. They adapted to it, learned its logic, and used it to endure. The crackle of the stove, the frost glinting on the logs, the muffled sound of the wind, all these things for them weren't just background noise. They were the rhythm of existence itself, the dialogue between man and the elements. So next time you feel the chill creeping through your window, remember, for those who came before us, every degree of warmth was a victory, every night survived was a triumph, and every sunrise was proof that humanity could outlast even the most merciless cold.